A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So Daniel sent us this one. He is asking about the term military brass. We hear it all the time in news reports and movies, usually referring to the top level of a military. But Daniel wants to know what actually qualifies as top brass in a massive organization like the United States Army, and more interestingly, how many layers of human leadership actually exist between those 4-star generals and the privates in the field.
This is a great prompt because people use the word brass so loosely. Sometimes they mean any officer, sometimes they mean the Pentagon, but in the Army, it has a very specific, almost tiered definition. And by the way, fun fact, today's episode is actually being powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash.
Oh, nice. I hope Gemini 3 Flash knows its way around a firing line. But seriously, Herman, when we talk about the brass, where does that even come from? It sounds like something from the Age of Sail or something.
You are actually not far off. It dates back to the late 19th century. It refers to the ornate gold embroidery, often called scrambled eggs, on the brims of senior officers' caps. Back then, that thread was often made of brass-colored metal wire. So, if you saw the shiny metal on the hat, you were looking at the brass.
It's funny how these things stick. I read somewhere that in the British Army, they used to call them brass hats specifically. Did that cross the pond and just get shortened?
During World War I, the term brass hat was a common slang among British soldiers for anyone above the rank of major who spent their time in a comfortable headquarters far behind the lines. The Americans adopted it, and by World War II, it was just the brass. It became shorthand for the people making the big decisions while everyone else was eating dust.
So it is literally a fashion statement that became a job title. I like it. But in the modern U.S. Army, which is 480,000 active duty soldiers now in 2026? You can't just say everyone with a shiny hat is the top brass. Where is the cutoff?
Technically, the Commissioned Officer Corps starts at Second Lieutenant, which is an O1 rank. But when people say top brass, they are almost exclusively talking about general officers. Those are the ranks from O7 to O10. If you have a star on your shoulder, you are the brass. If you have 4 of them, you are the top of the top.
Okay, so we are looking at a tiny fraction of that 480,000. Because if everyone was brass, nothing would ever get cleaned. How many generals are we actually talking about?
It is a pyramid with a very, very sharp point. By law, the number of general officers is capped. In the active duty Army right now, you are looking at roughly 300 to 350 generals total, out of nearly 500,000 people. That is 0.07% of the force.
That is an insane span of control if you think about it. It's like a massive corporation where the C-suite is only a few hundred people for a global workforce. So, let's break down these stars. Start at the bottom of the top, the 1 star.
That is a Brigadier General, or O7. Usually, a Brigadier General serves as a Deputy Commanding General for a division. A division is a massive unit, maybe 10,000 to 16,000 soldiers. So, even at the lowest level of being a general, you are already helping oversee a small city's worth of people.
But wait, if they are deputy commanders, do they actually have their own sandbox to play in? Or are they just the backup for the 2-star?
They usually have a specific portfolio. One Brigadier General might be the Deputy Commanding General for support, focusing on the logistics and the supply chain, while another is the Deputy Commanding General for maneuver, focusing on the actual combat movements. They aren't just waiting in the wings, they are running massive subsections of the organization.
And then you move to 2 stars.
Major General, O8. This is a big one because a Major General typically commands a full division. In the Army's organizational logic, the division is the primary tactical unit that can operate independently for a sustained period. It has its own artillery, its own logistics, its own aviation. The Major General is the king of that hill.
I've always found the naming weird. Why is a major general lower than a lieutenant general? In the lower ranks, a major is higher than a lieutenant.
It's a historical quirk. It used to be Sergeant Major General, and they dropped the sergeant. Since a sergeant major is lower than a lieutenant, the title Sergeant Major General was lower than Lieutenant General. It's one of those things that drives lieutenants crazy when they're trying to memorize the rank structure. But after Major General, you hit the 3-star, which is Lieutenant General, 09.
And what are they doing? Are they still in the field?
Sometimes. A lieutenant general usually commands a corps. A corps is 2 or more divisions, so we are talking 20,000 to 45,000 soldiers. Or, and this is where the brass really becomes the brass, they serve as high-level staff officers at the Pentagon. They are the ones turning policy into reality. Think of them as the executive vice presidents of a company. They might be in DC, but they have their hands on the levers of global movement.
Then we get to the 4-star. The general. Plain and simple. How many of those do we have walking around in 2026?
There are currently 11 4-star generals in the U.S. Army. These are the individuals who lead the major Army commands. Think FORSCOM, which is United States Army Forces Command, or TRADOC, which is Training and Doctrine Command. They also serve as the Chief of Staff of the Army, or the Vice Chief of Staff. These are the people who sit in the room when the President asks what the Army can do.
And then there is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I think people get confused here. They see a 4-star general as the chairman and assume he's the boss of the whole army. But that isn't quite right, is it?
No, and that is a crucial distinction. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the highest-ranking military officer in the country, but they are not in the operational chain of command. They are the senior military advisor to the President and the Secretary of Defense. The actual orders for combat flow from the President to the Secretary of Defense, who is a civilian, directly to the combatant commanders.
Right. We talked about those combatant commanders before. Those are the ones like the head of CENTCOM or EINDOPACOM. They might be army generals, but they are commanding a joint force of Navy, Air Force, and Marines.
A great example of the top brass in action is the commander of U.S. Army Pacific, or U.S. RPC. That is a 4-star position. He is responsible for all Army operations across the Pacific Theater. When you think about the scale of that, thousands of miles, multiple countries, tens of thousands of troops, it is a massive management job.
It sounds less like being a soldier and more like being the CEO of a multinational conglomerate that happens to have tanks.
It really is. By the time you get to 3 and 4 stars, your job is strategy, diplomacy, and massive scale logistics. You aren't worried about whether a specific truck has oil, you're worried about whether the entire supply chain for the Pacific is resilient against a peer adversary. You're spending more time in business suits or meeting with foreign heads of state than you are at a firing range.
So we've established who the brass is. Now let's look at Daniel's second question. The distance. If I'm a private E1 sitting in a foxhole in a training exercise or a deployment, how many people are between me and that 4-star general? Because on paper it looks like a lot, but in reality, is it a straight line?
It is a very straight line, and that is by design. If you look at the total rank steps, there are 24 distinct steps from private to general, but you don't talk to all of them. In a standard combat unit, you are separated from the top brass by about 8 to 10 layers of direct operational command.
8 to 10 layers. That sounds manageable until you realize each layer has its own set of meetings. Walk me through it. I'm the private. Who is the first person I answer to?
Your first level is your team leader, usually a sergeant, E5. He's the one making sure you had your gear and you know where to point your rifle. Above him is the squad leader, a staff sergeant, E6. He's managing 2 or 3 teams.
Okay, so we are still in the NCO realm. The non-commissioned officers.
Yes, the NCOs are the backbone. They are the ones who actually execute the brass's plans. Above the squad leader, you have the platoon sergeant, a sergeant first class E7. He's the senior enlisted guy in the platoon, usually the one with all the experience. He's the one who tells the young lieutenant how things actually work without making the lieutenant look bad.
And then we hit the first officer, right? The butter bar.
Right. The platoon leader. Usually a second lieutenant 01. This is the very first level of what an enlisted soldier might call the brass, though technically they are company-grade officers. The lieutenant is fresh out of West Point or ROTC, and he's in charge of about 30 to 40 soldiers.
So that's 4 levels already. Sergeant, Staff Sergeant, Sergeant First Class, Second Lieutenant. We're still just at the level of a single platoon.
Moving up, you have the company commander, usually a captain, 03. A company is about 100 to 200 soldiers. This is where the administrative weight starts to get heavy. The captain is responsible for everything that company does or fails to do. If a soldier gets a DUI or if the company loses a piece of night vision equipment, it's the captain's head on the block.
And then we go to the battalion.
That's the battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel, 05. This is a major milestone in an officer's career. They have about 500 to 800 soldiers under them. They have a full staff of majors and captains helping them plan operations. At this level, the commander isn't just leading people, they are managing a system.
We're at 6 levels now. Still haven't seen a star.
Next is the brigade commander, a colonel, 06. A brigade is a big deal, 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. In the modern army, the brigade combat team is the unit that is often deployed as a single entity. The colonel is the one coordinating the infantry, the armor, and the engineers. This is the highest level before you hit general status.
And then finally we reach the top brass.
Yes. Level 8 is the division commander, a major general, 08. This is the 2-star we talked about, 10,000 to 16,000 soldiers. If you are a private, the major general is likely the highest ranking person you will ever actually see in person, and even then, it'll probably be from a distance during a change of command ceremony or a very high-stakes inspection.
But wait, if there are only 11 4-stars and a private is 8 levels away from a 2-star, how many more levels are there to the very top?
To get to the Chief of Staff of the Army, you'd add the Corps Commander, that's the 3-star, and then the Major Army Command level. So for a private in the field, you're looking at about 10 distinct human links in the chain between your foxhole and the office in the Pentagon where the 4-star sits.
It's wild to think about. 8 to 10 layers of human beings, each with their own interpretation of the mission, their own stresses, and their own leadership styles, all standing between the person making the high-level strategy and the person actually carrying it out.
It's a game of telephone, but with life and death consequences. That is why the Army is so obsessed with doctrine and standard operating procedures. They need to ensure that when a general says move west, the private doesn't end up moving south because the message got garbled at level 5.
I also want to talk about the people who live in the cracks of this hierarchy. Daniel mentioned warrant officers. Where do they fit in? Because they aren't exactly enlisted, but they aren't traditional command officers either.
Warrant officers are the Army's technical experts. They go from W1 to W5. They are the helicopter pilots, the high-end cyber specialists, the CID agents. They sit in this unique space between the NCOs and the commissioned officers. They don't usually command large units, but they have immense authority because of their specialized knowledge. In some ways, they are the most powerful people in the room because the brass relies on them to tell them if the technology is actually going to work.
I love the idea of the warrant officer. It's like the guy in a company who has been there for 30 years and knows where all the bodies are buried. The CEO might have the title, but if that guy leaves, the whole place falls apart.
That is exactly what a Chief Warrant Officer 5 is. If a CW5 tells a colonel that the helicopters can't fly in this weather, those helicopters are staying on the ground. It doesn't matter how many stars or eagles are in the room. They are the subject matter experts who bypass a lot of the traditional social hierarchy of the brass.
So we have the 3 ladders: enlisted, warrants, and commissioned. But let's talk about the culture of the brass. You mentioned that enlisted soldiers often refer to anyone from a major on up as the brass. Why major? That's only an 04. They aren't even generals yet.
It's the transition from the mud to the mahogany. A captain is still very much in the field with the troops, but once you hit major, you move on to a staff. You are in a headquarters. You are looking at spreadsheets and PowerPoints. To a private who is sleeping in the rain, a major who is working in a climate-controlled tent with a hot coffee might as well be the Secretary of Defense.
I can see that. It's the divide between tactical and operational. Once you move into that headquarters environment, your perspective shifts. You're looking at the map, not the terrain. Does that cause a lot of friction?
Constantly. There's a term called the Great Captain's Gap, or similar phrases that describe the disconnect between the company-level officers who see the reality and the staff-level brass, who see the data. A major might see that a unit is at 90% strength on a report, but the captain knows that the 10% missing are the only guys who know how to fix the radios.
Which brings up a question about the 5-star general. Daniel mentioned the rank of General of the Army, O11. We haven't had one of those since 1981, and that was Omar Bradley. Why don't we use it anymore?
It is a wartime-only rank. It was created during World War II because our generals were commanding millions of troops alongside British field marshals, and we needed a rank that matched theirs. It is a rank of immense prestige, but in peacetime it is considered unnecessary. It would be like having a CEO of CEOs.
So, it's basically the in case of World War glass box. Break glass, add a star.
Pretty much. But even without that 5th star, the power concentrated at the O10 level is staggering. When you look at the Chief of Staff of the Army, he is responsible for the readiness of the entire force. He's the one who has to tell Congress why they need more money for a new tank or why the recruitment numbers are down.
Let's talk about the practical implications of this hierarchy. Is it a strength or a weakness? Because on one hand, you have total clarity. Everyone knows exactly who is in charge of them. On the other hand, 8 to 10 layers of command seems like a recipe for bureaucracy and slow decision-making.
It is both. The strength is that in a crisis, the hierarchy provides a framework that doesn't collapse. If a leader is killed or incapacitated, the next person in line steps up immediately. There is no debate. But the weakness is definitely the speed of information. We saw this in the early days of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The top brass was making decisions based on data that was hours or even days old, while the soldiers on the ground were dealing with a reality that was changing by the minute.
That is where the concept of mission command comes in, right? I've heard that term used a lot lately.
Mission command is the Army's attempt to fix that rigidity. The idea is that the top brass gives the commander's intent, the what and the why, but they leave the how to the people on the ground. They say, I want this hill taken because it controls the valley. How you take it is up to you.
It's a trust-based system, but it's hard for the brass to let go, isn't it? Especially when modern technology allows a general in the Pentagon to see a live drone feed of a squad in a village halfway around the world.
That is the tactical straw problem. You have 4-star generals trying to direct individual squads because they can see them on a screen. It's a nightmare for the subordinates. It undermines the authority of the NCOs and the junior officers. If the general is telling the sergeant where to put his machine gun, why do you need the sergeant?
It's the ultimate form of micromanagement. I imagine it's incredibly frustrating for the people in the middle. You've spent 20 years learning how to lead, only to have a guy 3,000 miles away tell you you're doing it wrong because he can see a thermal image you can't.
And that is why the best generals are the ones who deliberately distance themselves from the tactical details. They focus on providing the resources and the political cover so the people below them can do their jobs. They understand that their job is to look at the horizon, not the dirt at their feet.
So, what can our listeners take away from this? If they're reading a news report about U.S. Army brass saying something, what should they be looking for?
First, check the rank. If it's a brigadier general, they are likely speaking for a specific division or a mission. If it's a 4-star, they are speaking for the entire institution. Second, understand that the brass are not just figureheads. Their rank carries specific legal authority. When a general signs an order, it has the force of law within the military. And finally, remember that pyramid. For every one general you see on the news, there are over 1,000 soldiers doing the actual work.
It's a massive machine. And understanding the gears, from the 4 stars down to the private stripes, is the only way to really understand how the U.S. projects power.
It really is. It's an organization like no other. The scale is just hard to wrap your head around until you see the layers. Think about a game of chess where every piece is actually a smaller chessboard. That's the Army.
Well, this has been a fascinating look into the world of the brass. I think we've given Daniel a lot to chew on. Before we wrap up, I want to say thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show.
This has been My Weird Props. If you have a question about military hierarchy or anything else that's been on your mind, send it our way.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and all the ways to subscribe. We're also on Spotify if you haven't followed us there yet.
Until next time.
Take it easy. You know, Herman, thinking about that pyramid, I wonder how it changes in the future. If we have more AI and more autonomous systems, do we need as many layers? Or does the brass just get even more concentrated?
That is the million-dollar question. Some people think AI will flatten the hierarchy because information will flow so much faster. If a private's biometric data and drone feed go straight to a server that the general can see, do you need the 6 middle managers? Others think it will lead to even more centralization, where a few people at the top can control every single asset in real time.
Imagine a world where the top brass is just one guy and a very powerful server. That's a scary thought for the NCOs. It takes the human out of human leadership.
It's the ultimate tension between technology and human leadership. The Army is a human organization, and I don't think you can ever fully automate the trust that sits between those layers of command. You need a sergeant to look a private in the eye when things get bad. A screen can't do that.
No, you're right. You can't put scrambled eggs on a server rack. It just wouldn't look the same. And you certainly can't replace the experience of a guy who's been through the mud.
Definitely not.
All right, we're actually done now. See ya.
See ya.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow